a corrupt businessman, a stolen fortune, a love that was never meant to be destroyed. When he starts digging into the past, he uncovers a deadly truth. But some truths refuse to stay buried. Watch till the end, because this is only the beginning. Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to another exciting movie journey with us. Get ready as we bring you the full gist about this intriguing Nigerian movie, packed with hidden morals and life lessons that we're going to reveal today. Don't go anywhere. Grab your popcorn and enjoy the ride with us. And hey, make sure to subscribe because we have lots of exciting movie goodies coming your way. Without further ado, let's get started. On March 2nd, 1996, David Njoku was involved in a ghastly accident and lost his life. But here's where things get strange. A young man entered his car, not to help, but to steal some documents before vanishing into the night. Fast forward to March 2nd, 2024, exactly 28 years later. Lisa Njoku, David's widow, is now in charge of her late husband's company. That morning, as she was preparing to leave for work, the housekeeper informed her that she had a visitor. Stepping into the living room, Lisa found Mr. Charles sitting there. He tried to sweet-talk her into a relationship, but Lisa wasn't having any of it. She rejected his advances and walked away. Meanwhile, elsewhere in town, Femi had just returned home with a faulty TV that he took to a repair shop. He started narrating the whole experience to his friend David, but David wasn't paying attention. He seemed lost in thought. What could be on David's mind? Femi snapped him back to reality by reminding him it was his birthday. To celebrate, Femi brought out 2 bottles of alcohol, a loaf of bread, and a candle. They toasted, shared some laughter, and enjoyed the moment. The next day, David was driving his Uber car when he received a call from Femi, but due to network issues, he couldn't hear him properly. Then, suddenly bam, he was involved in an accident. At the same time, Lisa was at her office lost in thought when a knock interrupted her. It was her friend, Sandra. Lisa confided in Sandra about Mr. Charles's visit and how he had professed his feelings for her. Sandra, trying to be the good friend, urged Lisa to give love another chance, or at least consider Charles. But Lisa shook her head. "It's too late for me," she said. "I've already given my heart to one man, David Njoku." Memories of her late husband came rushing back. At the hospital, Femi waited anxiously when the doctor approached. The news wasn't good. David's condition was critical. Femi, now panicked, pleaded with the doctor, do whatever it takes to save him. Later that day, Mr. Charles and his bodyguard, Bruno, met at the waterside to discuss their next move, taking over Lisa's company. Charles had a flashback to 28 years ago when Bruno had stolen David Njoku's documents from the accident scene. But when Charles realized the most important document was missing, he angrily threw the files at Bruno. Wait, does this mean Charles was behind David Njoku's accident? His own best friend? And now he still wants to take David's wife? This is getting deep. Let's see how it all unfolds. Just then, Charles's son, Manfred, arrived at the waterside. His father turned to him and asked, "Do you know why we're here?" Manfred hesitated before responding, "Because this is your favorite place to discuss business?" Charles wasted no time. "I heard about the business deal you fumbled." Before Manfred could explain, Charles slapped him hard across the chest. The impact sent him crashing to the ground. Then, without mercy, Charles grabbed him, pulled him up, and warned, "From now on, you'll run every business deal through me." To make matters worse, he seized Manfred's car and stormed off. Back at home, David had finally been discharged from the hospital with Femi's help. As they sat down to talk, Femi asked, "Do you remember anything before the accident?" David started recalling the events, but then something went wrong. Suddenly, he began convulsing. Femi panicked. Not knowing what to do, he tried to put his hand inside David's mouth, but David bit him. Femi screamed in pain and quickly grabbed his phone to call the doctor. Wow! What a roller coaster. This movie is packed with betrayal, suspense, and shocking revelations. What do you think about Charles? Do you believe he caused David Njoku's accident? And what about Lisa? Should she open her heart to love again? Let's talk in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing movie breakdowns. Later that same day, David was feeling a bit better and more relaxed when Femi brought his medication and reassured him, "Nothing will happen to you, my guy." David nodded, then suddenly started humming a song. Femi just stared at him. confused. The next day, Lisa's daughter, Tana, unexpectedly returned home. Lisa was visibly surprised. She hadn't been expecting her daughter so soon, and Tana hadn't informed her she was coming. Tana, taken aback by her mother's reaction, felt unwelcome. Sensing the tension, Lisa quickly pulled her into a hug to make her feel at home. Meanwhile, back at Femi and David's apartment, things took a sudden turn. David began experiencing another seizure, but this time, Femi wasn't around to help him. Hours later, when Femi finally returned, David slowly woke up from his seizure and asked Femi a strange question. "Who are you?" At first, Femi laughed it off, thinking David was joking. But then, David started saying bizarre things, asking about his wife and his company. Femi's smile faded. Which wife? Which company? He started suspecting David had suffered serious head trauma, possibly leading to memory loss or even a mental disorder. But before Femi could process everything, David went into another seizure, this time more violent than before. Moments later, he collapsed and became unconscious. Panic-stricken, Femi rushed him to the hospital. At the hospital, Femi desperately asked the doctor, "Doc, what's wrong with him?" The doctor explained that an MRI scan had revealed some abnormalities in David's brain. But Femi, not understanding all the medical jargon, just stared in confusion. Seeing this, the doctor simplified it. "Your friend's brain has suffered some damage. It's affecting his memory and behavior." Femi sighed in relief that at least he understood something and thanked the doctor. The next day, Mr. Charles paid Lisa a visit at her office. With his usual charm, he invited her out for a lunch date, but Lisa, uninterested, politely declined. "I have a business meeting to attend." Charles, slightly irritated, left her office. Later that same day, as David lay on his hospital bed, he began having a vivid dream. In it, he saw a younger version of Lisa and David Njoku. Guys, could this mean David Njoku's spirit has been reincarnated in David? How is that even possible? Drop your thoughts in the comment section, because this plot just took a wild turn. The dream abruptly ended as David woke up in a panic. Without hesitation, he jumped out of bed and ran out of the hospital, still dressed in his hospital scrubs. Meanwhile, Femi, who was in a tricycle, CHIKE, spotted David running down the street. He shouted his name, jumped out of the keiki, and took off running after him. This is a hilarious and chaotic scene. Back at Lisa's apartment, she returned home from work and found Tana sitting in the living room. They had a brief chat before Tana, concerned about her mother, gently said, "Mom, I think you need to move on. You're overworking yourself, and honestly, you look lonely." Lisa smiled and reassured her, "Don't worry about me, my dear. I'm fine." Over at Femi and David's apartment, David sat down deep in thought. He turned to Femi and said, "I remember my past. I was married, and I owned a company." Femi's eyes widened. "Which past? Oga, we grew up together after your mother died. What are you talking about?" Femi was starting to feel overwhelmed. He quickly dipped a handkerchief in a bowl of water and placed it on his forehead to help him cool down. Guys, Femi is too dramatic, but David was serious. "I can prove it to you," he insisted. "Let's go somewhere." Later that same day, David and Femi went to the bank to retrieve some important documents. The bank staff handed David a form to fill out, and while he was doing so, Femi started fidgeting. His gut told him something wasn't right. Moments later, the bank manager returned with the documents David Njoku had stored in the safe. She handed them over, but then paused, suspiciously staring at David. "Wait, what's your name?" she asked. "David," he answered confidently. Her eyes widened. Suddenly, she snatched the documents back. "This can't be! You're not the David Njoku I know!" She insisted that David undergo facial recognition before she could release anything to him. Meanwhile, Mr. Charles received a phone call. After the call, he smirked evilly, like a man plotting something terrible. As David and Femi were leaving the bank, David spotted Mr. Charles walking in. Their eyes met for a brief moment. David thought, what a coincidence. But Mr. Charles didn't recognize him and walked right past him. Inside the bank, David Njoku's lawyer spotted Charles and immediately confronted him. "What are you doing here?" Charles gave him a cold, disdainful look, then walked away without saying a word. The lawyer, confused and suspicious, turned to the bank manager, his wife, and asked, "Why did you give those documents to a total stranger?" The bank manager sighed and explained, "I didn't just hand them over. He had the codes to access the safe. No one else but David Njoku should have had them." Wait. If David Njoku has truly been gone for 28 years, how does this David have the codes? This story is getting deep. Could reincarnation really be possible? Or is there something else going on? What do you think? Let's talk in the comments. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling movie breakdowns. That same night, David took Femi to his favorite bar for a drink. Femi was in awe of the luxurious lifestyle David claimed to have lived in his past life. Curious, he decided to do a quick Google search on David Njoku. That's when he discovered something chilling. David Njoku died on March 2nd, 1996, the exact same day and year David was born. Femi's jaw dropped. How is this even possible? His brain couldn't process it. The following night, Femi and David were outside their apartment when Femi finally spoke up. "Guy, you see how my heart nearly jumped out when we were inside that bank manager's office? That was madness." The next day, Sandra visited Lisa at home and suggested she go on a blind date. Lisa wasn't having it. She waved it off immediately. That same night, David Njoku's lawyer paid him a visit concerning the documents he retrieved from the bank. As they spoke, David began recalling past events they had shared together, memories only Njoku could have known. The lawyer sat there, completely perplexed. The next morning, David suited up, looking sharp, and headed to the company with Femi. As Lisa was walking into the office, she suddenly overheard someone say the same words David Njoku always used to say, "Life never stops, always forward." Lisa froze. She turned sharply and walked straight to David. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" David, playing it cool, replied, "Oh, nothing much. I actually came for a job interview." Aha! This guy knows what he's doing. He definitely said those words on purpose to get Lisa's attention, and it worked. Inside Lisa's office, David introduced himself as David Essie, but Lisa wasn't convinced. She narrowed her eyes. "Why did you say those words earlier?" David shrugged. "I've been saying them for as long as I can remember." Lisa was deep in thought. Interesting. Just then, the receptionist walked in. Lisa turned to her and said, "I've hired David as my new PA. Please take him to Human Resources." Hold up, did Lisa just hire him on the spot? Looks like she's already drawn to him. If only she knew the truth. Her beloved David Njoku has reincarnated and is standing right in front of her. Later that night, Mr. Charles and his son Manfred were at the waterside. Mr. Charles gave Manfred a devious task, seduce Lisa. But Manfred shook his head. "Dad, I can't do that." Meanwhile, back at David's apartment, he was relaxing when he suddenly had a flashback. He saw himself giving Lisa a bouquet of flowers and a note. The next morning, Lisa stood in front of David Njoku's picture on the wall and sighed. "I wish you were here with me," she whispered. Just then, she heard David's voice behind her. She turned around shocked to see him standing there. Trying to shake off the weirdness, Lisa invited David to join her in the kitchen. While they were talking, David casually asked, "By the way, what made you hire me on such short notice?" Lisa hesitated, then admitted, "There's just something about you. I can't explain it. You remind me of someone I used to know." Ah, if only she knew that the someone is the very person standing right in front of her. The next day, Lisa and Sandra were chatting in the office when the secretary walked in holding a bouquet of flowers and a note. Sandra opened the note and started reading it out loud. Lisa's eyes widened. These were the exact same words David Njoku used to say to her. She began to wonder, could it be? Just then, David walked in, dropped a document on her desk, smiled, and walked out. Sandra turned to Lisa with a mischievous grin. "Lisa, this your new PA is fino. If I wasn't married, some married women and their secret crushes on young, handsome men." Later that night, David sat at home, lost in thought. Femi walked in and immediately noticed. "Guy, what's up? Wait, how did you manage to send Lisa those flowers and that note without her knowing?" David chuckled. "It's a skill, my guy." The next day, Mr. Charles met Manfred at the waterside again. This time, they came up with a new plan. Manfred suggested, "Instead of me seducing Lisa, why don't we use David instead? She trusts him, and he's close to her." Mr. Charles thought about it for a moment and then smirked in agreement. Oh no! Are they about to use David against Lisa? What do you guys think will happen next? Let's discuss in the comments. Later that same day in the office, David and Lisa were working when Lisa suddenly noticed something. David was playing with a ball in his hands, just like David Njoku used to do. She froze for a moment as a flashback hit her. The next day, Lisa was at home on a call when the gateman brought in a small gift bag, saying someone had dropped it off for her. Before Lisa could react, Tana quickly grabbed it, eager to see what was inside. She opened the bag and her eyes widened. Inside was a pair of expensive diamond jewelry. Tana found a note and read it out loud, excitement all over her face. Lisa, on the other hand, was still puzzled. Someone had been sending her flowers, and now an expensive diamond gift? Who could it be? The next day, Femi excitedly showed David the new shirts he had just bought. He placed them on the chair and went to get something. That's when Mr. Charles and Manfred walked into the apartment. Without a second thought, they grabbed Femi's new shirts, used them to cover the chair, and sat on them. When Femi came back and saw this, he was not cool with it at all. Ignoring the tension, Mr. Charles turned to David. "I have a proposal for you," he said. He wanted David to seduce Lisa and promised to reward him handsomely for it. David paused for a moment, then simply said, "I'll think about it," before walking away. If only Mr. Charles knew he was talking to his best friend, David Njoku. Greed has completely blinded him. Let's see how this all plays out. The next day at the office, Lisa turned to Sandra with a serious question. "Do you believe in reincarnation?" Sandra looked at her surprised. "I don't know. I've never encountered such a thing," she replied. Lisa simply nodded. "Never mind," she said, then walked away. Later that same day, Lisa entered her office and saw a bag containing food and wine. She took a closer look at the food and the playful caricature drawn on it. Flashback! Her mind raced back to the past. David Njoku had done the exact same thing for her before. Snapping back to reality, Lisa suddenly felt uneasy. She turned to David. "Who brought this?" David pretended not to know. He simply shrugged, playing innocent. Lisa didn't push further. She just walked out of the office, deep in thought. A few hours later, David went to meet Mr. Charles at the waterside. Mr. Charles handed him a document and smirked. "I need Lisa to sign this," he said. "Once she does, I'll have sole ownership of the company." David took the document and left. But here's the twist. David wasn't working alone. He met up with Femi and a tech guy who carefully wired David with a hidden recording device. Wait, so all this time, David was recording every conversation he had with Mr. Charles? Now, he had solid evidence to use against him. Later that evening, Femi returned with the same document Mr. Charles had given David. "You won't believe what I found," Femi said, showing David the results of his investigation. It turned out that Mr. Charles had been embezzling money from the company. David leaned back, deep in thought. It was time to plan his next move. The next day, David visited Lisa at home. Lisa looked weak. She told him she hadn't been feeling well, which was why she didn't go to the office. Without hesitation, David offered to make her soup. He went straight to the kitchen, prepared the soup, and brought it to her. As he fed her, he suddenly looked at her with a mix of frustration and concern. Then, he snapped. "Lisa, you need to start taking care of yourself," he scolded, his tone rising. "You keep allowing everything around you to weigh you down. You need to put yourself first." Lisa stared at him in shock. She couldn't believe it. For a moment, it felt like she was hearing someone from her past. "You sound just like someone I used to know," she whispered. Later that night, Manfred called Tana. "I need to tell you something," he said over the phone. "I have feelings for you." But Tana's response wasn't what he had hoped for. She didn't give him the answer he wanted. David was still at Lisa's house when she accidentally hit her leg while walking. He rushed to her side, helping her up and gently massaging the injured leg. Just then, his phone rang. Lisa froze for a moment. She recognized the song playing as David's ringtone. That song used to be her and her late fiancé's favorite. Curious, David played the song out loud. As the melody filled the air, he reached for Lisa's hand and started dancing with her. Lost in the moment, they swayed to the rhythm, their eyes locked. Then, David leaned in and kissed her. He confessed his feelings for her, and without hesitation, they continued kissing. The next day, David visited Lisa in her office. He told her that someone was embezzling money from the company's account. He had proof, and he could expose the culprit. But he needed her help. After leaving Lisa's office, David overheard Mr. Charles and Manfred talking. Sensing something important, he quickly recorded their conversation on his phone. Later, he met with the lawyer to lay out his plan to expose Mr. Charles. The next day, Lisa set a trap. She invited Mr. Charles and Manfred to her house. David was already seated close to Lisa, but as soon as Mr. Charles walked in, his arrogance showed. He looked at David and demanded that he sit elsewhere. David, calm as ever, obliged. Lisa then told Mr. Charles about a business meeting in Kaduna that he needed to attend. She also handed him some documents that required his signature. Immediately, Mr. Charles sensed something was off. He excused himself and tried to leave. But what he didn't know was that the compound was surrounded by police. As soon as he attempted to escape, they caught him. Lisa, David, and the lawyer stepped outside. There stood Mr. Charles, handcuffed. David then revealed to Lisa that Mr. Charles had been embezzling company funds. To prove it, he played the voice recording of Mr. Charles talking about the fraud. But that wasn't all. David also revealed that Mr. Charles was responsible for David Njoku's death. Mr. Charles was shocked. Lisa stood there, stunned. She couldn't believe that Mr. Charles was capable of such evil. As for Manfred, he tried to escape too, but the police were already on him. Later that night, Lisa and David were alone in the house. She had questions. She wanted to know how David knew so much about her late fiancé. That's when David began to explain. He told her about the accident he was in and how he woke up as someone else. Lisa struggled to understand. It didn't make sense. She told David she needed time to process everything. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed, piecing everything together. Then she reached for the letter David had given her. As she read it, her eyes widened. The handwriting was the same as the notes she had been receiving. It finally hit her. David was the one secretly sending those notes. Lisa rushed to David's place that same night. She showed him the notes and demanded to know the truth. David had no choice but to confess. That's when he finally told her. He was her David. The same David she thought had died 28 years ago. Lisa didn't believe him. She turned around to leave. But then, David called her by the pet name her fiancé used to call her. Froze in her tracks. Slowly, she turned back to face him. David then pulled out the document he had retrieved from the bank. He reminded her of what she had once told him. If we are ever separated in this life, you must find me. I found you, Lisa. Lisa felt her entire world shift. Everything suddenly made sense. The signs had always been there, but she never believed in reincarnation. Now she had no choice. Tears welled up in her eyes. She rushed into David's arms, holding him tightly. It all felt so surreal, but deep down she knew this was her David. She had been given a second chance at love. And that's it, guys. Thank you for joining us on this exciting episode. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notification bell for more amazing stories. Till we meet again, goodbye.